And it's BOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And it looks like we have some people here in the chat. My name is Black Box Ned, and I come to you guys every Tuesday and Thursday live at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and this show is available for free downloads on all major podcasting sites. Because this is a segment where I can talk about multiple true crime subjects, I would like to begin with the Crime Talk points. I'm a daily and regular listener to Crime Talk, and I often start the show this way. And there are two major things that are going to not only be used to begin the show, but will also be used to enter into different parts of this discussion. The first is that, from Crime Talk, when people conduct meetings in secret, this becomes a breeding ground for conspiracy theories because everybody else who is not part of the meeting, no matter what the minutes are, no matter what the notes are, no matter what the documentation says, the people who are not part of the meeting are going to begin to formulate a type of hypothesis, forms of conjecture, and you guys know where this is going, conspiracy theories. If meetings are conducted in secret, the possibility for conspiracy theories is real. So that's point number one. Point number two is something that I've actually shared on a previous episode of Zodiac Monday. Every Monday I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, but this is relevant to the recent true crime news because some of you may have followed the story of Lori Vallow Daybell, a woman who has been accused of multiple murders, but she was on trial yet again. And when she was in the courtroom, she was found guilty. And one of the Crime Talk points is that when a defendant takes the stand, they will bring everything down to whether or not the jury likes their personality. But I'm thinking, does it go beyond that? Yes. Even when the defendant is only sitting in the chair in the courtroom, their personality is judged intensely. Body language, mannerisms, eye movements, is someone winking, is someone making faces at the jury, because Lori Vallow Daybell was found guilty. And in this situation, one of the jurors did an interview and he just said, well, we didn't like the way she was looking at us and we didn't like the expressions that she was making. So much of that comes down to personality. And this is even an ounce of anger. The jury is imagining you bashing somebody's head in. So much of life comes down to emotions, personality, character, and other people's perception of an individual's personality and character. Never mind the evidence or anything like that. But those are the Crime Talk points to begin the show. And I would like to just say welcome to everybody here in the chat. And because today is Tuesday, you guys can say hello to Snoopy here. This is vanilla spiced tea, by the way, and it's absolutely amazing. I was telling you guys on a recent episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, I've mostly quit coffee. Not 100%, but I have really just switched over to tea. And life is wonderful. Life is amazing. But I do want to say hi to everybody here in the chat. And we have Mike Half Moon Mullins, who says, good morning, Ned. Hope is all is well with you today. Peace, love, and all. What an amazing way to start things off. Mike, thank you so much. Peace and love to everybody. Dr. Casbah is here, who says, my great uncle is a suspect in my family beliefs. It's him. Okay, Dr. Casbah, would you like to provide some context? This is a live stream, so you guys can put anything you want in the live chat, and we can discuss this. You can tell me about some content that you want discussed on the show on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Any subject is fair game, anything under the sun or in the darkness, mostly in the true crime world. Sometimes there will be questions that I cannot answer, but I'm going to try my best. Mysteries with Mr. Belzeek says, hi, Ned. Good morning, bro. Hello, everybody in the chat. I hope you're all doing well. Hello to you too, Jerome. Good morning, and I hope everything is well with you too. We'll catch up later. Mike says, hello, happy Tuesday to you all. Hey, you guys are doing awesome. Everybody's in a good mood this morning. That's what we want, right? And we have Dark Side of the Moon that says, hello, Ned and Jerome and everyone. Hey, Dark Side, how you doing? And Classic Chevy Cat is here saying, hi, Ned. Hey, Classic Chevy Cat, how's it going? You guys get one more cheers from Snoopy. Now, there's one more story that I want to talk to you guys about that I encountered in the news very recently and very early on today. And this is one that is reminiscent of the Casey Anthony trial because a similar story happened. I know that the Casey Anthony trial does not need any introduction. However, she was accused of murdering her daughter, Kaylee Marie Anthony, and ultimately she was found not guilty. And the motive that was proposed by the prosecutors, as well as the investigators, as well as Nancy Grace, and as well as the general public, was that she murdered her daughter because of convenience, because she felt that her daughter, Kaylee Marie Anthony, was a burden on her. Well, a similar story happened in Nebraska. And I'm going to read a quotation to you guys now from World Star that says, a Nebraska teen was sentenced Thursday to 35 to 60 years in prison for fatally slashing her newborn's throat shortly after giving birth to her in a bathroom. Chloe Copeland Anderson, now 18, pleaded no contest to second-degree murder, and prosecutors said she gave birth in secret at age 16 and then retrieved a knife from the kitchen and killed the baby on November 6th of 2023. So, what's the difference here? What's the difference? Why would somebody like this Chloe Copeland Anderson be found guilty? And why would somebody like Casey Anthony be found not guilty? In the Casey Anthony trial, the jury ultimately decided that they could not determine the cause of death in the case of Kaylee Marie Anthony. Therefore, if they could not determine the cause of death, they couldn't determine whether or not someone had been murdered. This is their rationale. And there was a very similar story that happened a couple years after Casey Anthony, several years actually, and that's the case of Brooke Schuyler Richardson. I have 3 episodes actually about her here on Black Box Online Radio. And as soon as I heard that, in the case of Brooke Schuyler Richardson, it's similar to the story here. She gave birth in secret. She was accused of murdering her daughter, burying her in the backyard, possibly trying to burn the remains first, but they were unable to prove that. And they're just trying to determine was the baby girl murdered or not. She was found not guilty. Why would somebody be found not guilty in that situation? Same issue. They could not determine the cause of death. And with this story here of Chloe Copeland Anderson, they could determine the cause of death. Her daughter was slashed across the throat. All of that is right here in the headlines. And that is all I needed to know to tell you that most likely, she would be found guilty. She was found guilty, sentenced to 35 to 60 years in prison. Okay, thank you so much for all of the introductory statements here on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And to everybody, recently on the channel, I was talking about the New England serial killer. This is an ongoing set of news developments, and I had to mark the last episode private, so it's going to be a combination of news sources and old sources, but I really want this to focus on news sources. In New England, at least 12 bodies have been found, as reported by the Law and Crime Network, and they've been found in a very short amount of time. Within 60 days, 12 bodies have been found across the states of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Is this the work of a serial killer, or are these unconnected murders? And this has also taken the social media world by storm. And I do mean that, social media, because a lot of people are posting online, they're sharing their theories, and they're trying to assemble people together, all under this mindset that there's a serial killer on the loose in New England. But the authorities are very quick to dismiss this type of theory. And I've been following a lot of the, not exactly mainstream sources, but quasi-mainstream sources, if you will. Court TV, the Law and Crime Network, as well as other popular YouTube channels. And somebody once made a comment here on Black Box Online Radio that, Ned, how can you watch things like the Law and Crime Network? That stuff's terrible. And I always said, anybody can have an opinion. Anybody can make an observation. Anybody can have an idea. You don't necessarily have to be somebody who is just kind of in the far off corner, wearing a mask or something, that whole thing. Put a mask on somebody and they'll tell you the truth. You don't have to only be in that zone. Sometimes people who have a bigger platform can make good observations. And the second reason is they can also bring guests on the program who can make good observations. I was tested, though, with the New England serial killer story. My statements were tested because They start dissecting and analyzing the comment section on Facebook. Yes, sure, I do some of that right. I'm not the Law and Crime Network, though. I'm also not Court TV, and I'm just a little bit surprised when you have all of these resources that small channels like this one don't have. And you know what? Let's see what's in the comments section on Facebook. Do we have any good news there? Yeah, I can do that. All right, sure, if that's where we're getting our news from. But in all fairness, they did talk to the detective that is mostly focused on the case, and he brought up an interesting development, and that is that they tried to use canines to connect the murders together in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts to see if there could be any type of scent that is going to be linking these crimes and the bodies. And the canines are getting nowhere. The dogs are getting nowhere. Part of me was wondering, is that even going to be possible after an extremely intense amount of time? Because the thing that throws search dogs off the most, as I understand, is direct sunlight. And Dr. Casbah is here who says, I'm currently in Providence, Rhode Island. Yes, Casbah, you shared some Rhode Island stuff in the past. If you have any insight on this case, please let me know. Dr. Casbah says, the media is going crazy. And Dr. Casbah also says, not all of the 11 are connected, but maybe a few. All right. Now, we are getting the heart and soul of the issue. Recent developments in the case indicate that at least one victim is almost definitely not a victim of a serial killer or not the victim of any murder or homicide. At least one victim most likely died under different circumstances. Number two, at least one person has been apprehended for a different murder and was not responsible for the other ones. That means that there's a little bit of evidence to indicate that there was not a serial killer operating. And the Law and Crime Network actually had a very interesting discussion, though, with an FBI profiler named Candace DeLong. And I think that it's exactly what I was saying about how even if you don't like their presentations, they can talk to people who can give interesting presentations. And one of the reasons why I do True Crime Talk Radio in the mornings is one of the same things that you guys do in the true crime world. Somebody makes a statement, and you're just going to sit back and think, wait a second, is that really true? And it becomes really hard for us to try and challenge the experts. I don't have any type of degree in the subject. Dr. Casbah does. He has a degree in psychology. He can challenge them more easily. But when I looked at true crime cases for 30 years, I began to get a few ideas. And one thing that this profiler, Candace DeLong, was faced with was they asked the challenge question: what would indicate that a serial killer is operating and that these aren't unconnected murders? And the response was, usually if there's a concentration in a geographic area, usually if there's a very similar MO, and of course the third would be hard physical evidence. And I'm like, you need a degree for that? You need to work with the FBI to learn things like that? Concentration in a geographic area, similarities in MO, and hard evidence? Well, yeah, if you have fingerprints from one person found at every single crime scene, that's one person. All right, well, if you have all of the victims were murdered within one city that has a very, very specific neighborhood, and they're all within this 5-mile radius, that's a cause for concern, much more so than across 3 states. And this can be done in different ways. On a highway, if there are bodies that are appearing all around a highway, and I was talking about this on a recent episode about the Route 8 killer, which is what I call a serial killer legend. Nothing complimentary, it's just that the Route 8 killer is the exact same situation. And that is that off of Route 8 in Connecticut, multiple bodies have been found, and people are like, is this a serial killer or are they unrelated murders? And what does Dr. Casbah say about how this is not completely a serial killer, but some of them, not all of the 11 are connected, but maybe a few? Well, then that's most likely the answer to the Route 8 killer, in my opinion, and I have a standalone episode about that. And most likely that will be the answer to this New England serial killer. But we have to really, really zone in on how and why this is going to be presented in the media, because we should know that if there is a serial killer on the loose, which crimes is that person responsible for? Which crimes are unconnected? And to Jesse Weber, who hosts Sidebar, he made a statement on his show. Well, if this is not a single serial killer, is this not a bigger cause for concern? And to be honest with you, I would say yes. Yes. And one statement, though, that I heard on a different channel, actually, Bad Things True Crime. And firstly, I'm going to raise my cup to Bad Things True Crime. They've reached 100,000 subscribers now. Cheers to them and all of their work and the content they put out. And then we have some statements that were made there that at any time in the United States, there are 50 serial killers that are active. And I began to think, I don't know if that's true. I've always heard that it was a much higher number, around 150 that were active at all every time. But with the discoveries of all these bodies, that goes to show that there could actually be even more murderers that are taking place. We're talking about domestic disputes and someone tried to hide the body. We are talking about some type of personal conflict that people are having, and they tried to hide the body. And I think Dr. Casbah is completely right. And he also says, example, 2 AA women in the 50s, similar burial areas. Well, yes. If they're done in that type of behavior, that could be a single serial killer. And before I get to some stuff from Bad Things True Crime, I want to point out that there was one more statement from Candace DeLong, and that is that when serial killers are operating, they are doing this in a fantasy-driven method and manner. And this is some type of fantasy that they have had since childhood, particularly adolescence, that they act out in their adult years. And that's the stuff that really hits me, because that's when I have those moments when I have to say, is that really true? Is that really what's happening with all serial killers? And I just really began to think, that is such a general statement, that all serial killers are fantasy-driven individuals who develop some type of imaginary fantasy about murdering people in their youth, particularly in adolescence, and they're just waiting till adulthood to act it out. I thought that was too extreme, but I began to think more and more about this. And over the years, the more that I've taken in about true crime and criminal psychology and listening to profilers, I can understand that a little bit more now. And Dr. Casbah, you're a psychologist, weigh in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Between the ages of 0 and 4, a person can be emotionally traumatized to the point where it's going to affect their personality for the rest of their life. This can also be viewed as a generational trauma passed down from the parents to the children. The parents have not processed their emotional traumas, and then they start acting a certain way around their children, and then they receive the types of emotional damage. So this can especially happen between the ages of 0 and 4. And again, from the ages of 4 to, let's say, 13, if there is some type of traumatic experience during those years, absolutely that can be a factor. And I'm sure there are going to be exceptions that are going to prove this rule about how maybe somebody didn't experience the emotional trauma until their adulthood. Maybe somebody didn't develop these types of murderous issues until their adulthood. But I mean, as an overall statement, I do tend to agree with that. And Linda G says, I worked with Paige Fannin, excuse me. You wrote into the last live stream, right, Linda? We were talking about a few things. And Dr. Casbah says, but one victim in a suitcase blamed on someone and another girl with river items on them, 99-1 suicide. Yes, and they just open, as I said, one victim has almost certainly been ruled as not a homicide. Now, one issue that people are having is that Jesse Weber even said this when he's like, you have all these differences where victims are found dumped on the side of the road. One person has been dismembered and put into a suitcase. And I think we're just going to be coming back to the Long Island serial killer over and over again. And the Long Island serial killer is going to be a case study that is going to be shared for decades throughout the true crime world, as well as the worlds of criminology and criminal psychology. Because the Long Island serial killer started out by dismembering bodies. And then in 2007, the Long Island serial killer switched to strangling the victims, dumping them without dismemberments. This is a clear case on how MO can change. And what do we have? Linda G says in the chat, MO can change. And Dr. Lee Meller said it best. People commit different crimes for different reasons. A second reason why I tend to believe that the Long Island serial killer did some very similar things to these murders, and that is that there's a victim in the Long Island serial killer case named Cherry's Jane Doe. She was never identified. She is a possible victim of the Long Island serial killer, but I think he did it. Her body was dismembered and placed into a suitcase. But, you have this concentration of homicides, and they're dismembered all the way up to 2007. Sherry Jane Joe was murdered in 2007. And she had a fruit tattoo on her body of a pair of cherries. That's how she gets that name. There's another victim of the Long Island serial killer named Peaches Jane Doe, who was dismembered. Her body was placed in different areas, some on Gilgo Beach and some in a trash can. She had a peach tattoo. Fruit tattoos, dismemberments, separating the bodies. One of them ends up on Gilgo Beach in the serial killer graveyard. That indicates to me that there's a high chance that she was murdered by the same person. You don't know that 100%. This goes into the category of being somewhat of an educated guess. And we have a super chat here from Van Life Northwest saying, "Morning, Ned. Hey, thank you so much for that." And yes, anybody can use the super chat, super thanks, here on YouTube, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. We have a big cheers for Van Life Northwest. And Dr. Casbah has a comment here in the chat saying, "If a child witnessed a dramatic experience under the age of puberty, they may have a sexual reaction, which is, of course, what the reason is sexual, because killing is a sexual crime." Yeah, you mean if they have had a traumatic experience, then they can develop this sexual attraction toward trauma, and that is going to be fueling the desires that they have to inflict violence on other people, because it creates a very specific type of stimulation within their brains. Whereas somebody who did not experience that trauma will just not have any interest in or desire in that at all. I always quote Dr. James H. Fallon, author of The Psychopath Inside, when he said that the absolute biggest factor in driving someone to become a serial killer is child abuse. And Linda G says, "Was Cherries a black woman?" Most likely, Linda. Cherries was either black or Hispanic, and Peaches was like either black or Hispanic. So, and it's quite possible. You can be both. You can be both. And I know many people who identify as both. But yes, very similar. So, there's another thing here that I would like to do. Because if the Law and Crime Network can go through the comment section on Facebook and get their news, I would actually like to do some things else, because when I was watching their video on the New England serial killer, some people left some fascinating discussions here in the comment section. And Jeff Jones is here saying, "Good to see you, Ned." Hey, good to see you too, Jeff Jones. And we have one here from Lee who says, "YouTube is ridiculous. You can say the word that means something someone else took your life, but not the one that means you took your own, and it makes sense." That's referring to the terms that people are using to censor themselves. When some people are trying to avoid terms like SA, that means doing bad things to people in a sexual way, they'll just say it's sexual assault, and talking about how you cannot say the word suicide sometimes on YouTube. This is a small channel. They don't crack down on me as hard as they do on large channels. But you may have been noticing that people are trying to censor themselves nonstop. I think that that's just going to be an evolving game that we have. Lockset says, "There's definitely multiple serial killers out there in the US. Just a matter of fact, someone killing 3 or more is a serial killer. That's way more than the general public is aware of." That means that very easily there could be a serial killer involving in the New England crimes, but they just didn't commit all of them. XLNaut says, "The dump sites aren't similar in any way or geographically connected by a highway or river. This is internet nonsense." Well, you know who's going to agree with you? The people who are members of law enforcement that are always going to be throwing around these types of skeptical things, but it's not exactly skepticism. It's dismissing them. They're just dismissing the conspiracy theories. Some people say that they like hearing skeptical things about true crime, but that's not exactly the same. If you're just saying, "No, there's nothing, there's no evidence, wait a second. Why do you think that?" And we have a super chat in here from Casbah. Dr. Casbah, thank you so much. Hey, Dr. Casbah, you got a cheers from Snoopy. Much appreciated. But this whole thing about being internet nonsense, I completely accept, though, the issues about the geography, because I noticed that there are 3 crimes that happened in a roughly straight line in Springfield, Massachusetts, Framingham, and moving westward. Then I think that that is somewhat of a geographical connection for those 3, but the ones in southern New England are much more closer to the coast without any real connection to the ones that I just mentioned. Not a very strong correlation. And just on Zodiac Monday, I was talking to you guys about the Snake River killer, where the geographic connection with that is that the victims are found relatively close to the Snake River, with the Long Island serial killer. Think about everything that I said. Victims' remains were separated, like found in different places, but they were also dumped on Gilgo Beach. On Gilgo Beach and Oak Beach too. Gilgo Beach and Oak Beach. Well, Oak Beach is where things started with the murder of Shannon Gilbert, if she was murdered. And that is that there was what's called the serial killer graveyard. That's a geographic connection that's very strong. Okay, though, now, going on to the next one here, it's from Steven, says, these people that start screaming serial killer don't seem to understand that if it was a serial killer, it means much less work for the police, much less indeed. They have to try and prove this legally that many people are guilty. A lot of these idiots don't even seem to realize how massive the United States is, even if they live there. Well, we're only talking about one region in the United States, so I wouldn't call them idiots. However, the detective who was working one of the cases, is very public about this. Oh, no, this was not from the detective. This was from the guy who hosts the show Crime Weekly, excuse me. He said that the police would find it easier as well if it was a serial killer, and also they would want to pursue it if this was a serial killer. Now, there's like 11 different murderers out there. Not 11. Realistically, 7. Not joking. I'm not joking. And then somebody says, though, that the killer's name here is Jason Rodriguez of Taunton, Massachusetts. This is another prime example, everybody, on how somebody's going to say, I know who the killer was, but they're not saying how they did it. Excuse me, how did you obtain this information that that's who the killer was? Jason Rodriguez of Taunton, Massachusetts. Hey, Jason, if you're listening to this show, I'm not accusing you of being a serial killer. Somebody here in the comments section did. How about providing some supporting reasons why? And we have one from Zedka who says, the age of a traditional serial killer is largely over in Western countries, but in America, it is uniquely conducive to them. So much wilderness and so many guns. What I think this person is trying to say is that there are fewer serial killers in Western countries than there are in the United States. Too many open areas, too much wilderness? Yes. Too many guns? Yes. But guess what? The United States also has a very large population. I'm just curious. Hey, let's see, Zedka. Which country has a bigger population, the United States or Canada? I'm waiting for it. Okay, now we have one from Tremors fan. Firstly, I love Tremors too, who says serial killers have patterns. Dumping a body in a lake is different from putting a body into a suitcase. Frankly, I'm skeptical of the existence of a serial killer too. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to do a discussion on these comments, because we already talked about the changes in MO. Sometimes serial killers can change disposal methods. Sometimes serial killers can change the way that they're just acting, period. Different crimes for different reasons. But I started out like everybody here, just listening to all this stuff about the patterns of behaviors. And I ultimately had to abandon a lot of those things because I found so many exceptions to the rule that there wasn't even a rule anymore. This was just like serial killers behave differently, and they have reasons why they do things that they do. A big case that I always turn to is the story of Kenneth Harrison, who was the Boston giggler. And he was a serial killer who murdered at least 4 people, and he committed all of his crimes just with some type of difference. In one crime, with the murder of Clover Parker, he threw her off a bridge. He just said it was an impulse. He had the sudden urge to do that. His other 2 victims ended up in the water as well. He made a phone call to brag about it and said there's a body in the water. But with the final murder, the murder of Kenneth Martin, he strangled him with a piece of twine and left him in a subway tunnel. 4 crimes, all different. One person has confessed to all of them. I even was curious, is this guy actually responsible for all these crimes? One of his family members contacted me after I did my episode, and they were like, yes, he confessed to them all. So we have some stuff here in the chat, though, that I would like to respond to. And firstly, we have one thing from Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. I maybe have a solution to the Zodiac Killer's Z13 cipher, which makes sense. The Zodiac was asking for his own button. If it didn't happen, Paul Avery has made a button, and I'm not Paul Avery. The Z13 could be a response. And Jerome says, excuse me, it's I am Paul Avery, Zodiac sign. Now, Jerome, I know that Paul Avery is not your suspect in the Zodiac Killer case, so do you mean that he would be doing that to make a mockery of Paul Avery, a joke about Paul Avery, and that, is this going to work out with a substitution? Okay, so we have 3 A's, and there are 3 circle dates in the Z13. Is this lining up correctly? Am I understanding this, Jerome? Linda G says, no killer was ever caught from a profile alone. No, Linda G., but the profiles were very useful with catching David Meyerhofer, the Montana child killer, and he was caught in the 1970s. He died in 1974, committed suicide in his jail cell, and that is the first case where psychological profiling became the prime instrument in catching the killer. With the Zodiac Killer mystery? No. Texarkana Moonlight Murders? No. And with the Long Island serial killer case, DNA. Golden State Killer case, DNA. The profiles might be valuable, but Linda, yes. Yes. That's not enough to catch somebody. And it becomes very, very challenging, especially when you're dealing with people like Richard Walter, who have some questionable things about them. Dr. Casbah says, being a film and TV media person, I can tell you that a lot of times you can't say certain words if there wasn't enough political money involved, or that the FCC regulations were since you have no negative. Okay, do you mean that you can use a certain amount of curse words on television, but certain words have to be bleeped out? That was just kind of our understanding of this, because when I would watch TV with my family, we would notice that sometimes very clearly they're censoring a word, and then later on in the episode, they say the same word. Oh, Dr. Casbah says he may give a super chat so I can buy a new Fox Cup, because I lost my Fox Cup. Yes, the Fox was the star of the Thursday show. I was just along for the ride. This continues with, something interesting about the statistics of tri-state areas, such as Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, is that a lot of Connecticut and Rhode Island people don't associate with Massachusetts. Casbah, then that's also going to suggest that there are multiple killers operating within the New England serial killer case, because then, as I said, you have a relatively straight geographic line from Springfield moving eastward, and then you have another one near the coast. That doesn't suggest that it's the same person. You have to have some explanation about trucking routes or something like that, which if they did, I think that the media would just be blowing this out of proportion. We'd be like, hey, this is the New England interstate killer, instead of saying, no, we think this is all unrelated. Casbah says, Rhode Island is a quick run through to Connecticut. It has 1 million people, and they tend to know each other better than Connecticut and Massachusetts populations. Rhode Island's wonderful, though, Dr. Casbah. I love Newport. I love, the homes over there. Done that a couple times. Not to mention Salva Regina. Amazing. Classic Chevy Cat says, compared to other states and areas, isn't New England a rather small area? Yes. That's exactly what I was thinking. If you're going to compare that to, say, like the western part of the United States, like the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington State, way bigger areas than New England. I mean, this person had a point that there are lots of serial killers in America because of the wide open spaces and access to guns. That's not the real issue. The real issue is population, and that the serial killer demographics coincide and correlate to the population demographics. A bigger population equals a bigger population of serial killers. A bigger population of white people means more white serial killers. And yes, I do confess that there are more white male serial killers than white female serial killers, but that's just going to be a masculine versus feminine issue as opposed to a different type of demographic. And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, yes, I think the Z13 could have been mocking Paul Avery. Okay, says, I am Paul Avery Zodiac. All right, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, please send me like a small write-up about your findings. Maybe it can be worked into the next Zodiac Monday. Casbah says, some are the same. woods, parks, and all along the I-95 highway. Sure. But as I understand, though, like Springfield, Massachusetts is going to be relatively central, or even kind of moving westward. And then Framingham is going to be more in the middle. And then we're getting toward the Boston area. So I don't think all of that's on I-95. And Dr. Casbah continues with, my childhood home is in Connecticut, was on 8 acres of woods. Cool. Planet X Filmworks says, the new port tower is cool. Planet X Filmworks, do you want to provide some context? Classic Chevy Cat says, yes, I'm thinking about the areas in which they leave the bodies. Well, we are dealing with some type of relatively small geographic area. And, it's quite possible that there is just a concentration of homicidal activity, because one thing that I've also experienced, just looking into true crime cases as a casual follower like anybody else, is during some years, there can be more homicides than other years. I know that goes without saying, right? But that's something that does not correlate and coincide to the other statistics and demographics and psychographics that I was mentioning. Because you're just going to have an extremely large spike in crime. There could be variables that could affect it, or it could just be that people were out of control that year, and that just might be the ultimate conclusion. And I learned about this first because of the Zodiac killer case, and that in the year of 1969, they had twice as many homicides in the San Francisco Bay Area than they did in 68. I mean, I'm going to have to revise this because I want to get this perfectly, but that's not because of the Zodiac. That just happened to be because there was a high concentration of homicides for that particular year. So this develops what I call the murder in the air hypothesis. Yes, I coined that term. Unprofessional, yet I throw stuff around. You can thank Snoopy for it. It was his idea. He's writing about it now on the typewriter. But the murder in the air hypothesis is just that sometimes you will experience these things because of, like, what's going on in New England right now. Like what I was telling you about with the Route 8 killer and the Miami Strangler, which I talked to you about in the last episode, where there's a concentration of homicides in Miami, and some of them are different. Some of them are rather similar, different ages, all up the spectrum from the 20s to the 70s. Women are murdered, but the youngest victim was 24. The oldest was in her 70s. One person is connected to 2 of the crime scenes, a suspect named Calvin Jones Jr. It's possible that there is a serial killer operating and there are unconnected homicides. A larger cluster and concentration of homicidal activity. I just call it murder in the air because that's the first thing that came to mind. Joey Shriek is here, who says, what happened in 2001? You guys are going so fast in the chat, I'm going to try to keep up. And Dr. Casbah says, actually, the TV changed after 2001, and basically you can say anything you want. Well, okay, Joey's asking what happened in 2001. South Park made fun of this, so that was my window into it. I never watched the show NYPD Blue, but they did a controversial episode where they said the word shit on television. And like it was just like, oh, this is just monumental. You can't say that on TV. And it's like the last line in the show, shit happens. So they got permission to sort of do that, and they were able to push the censors back. And I'm not sure what year that was, but ever since then, I've just noticed things have been falling down as a domino effect. Oh, and Planet X Filmworks says, Newport Tower, possibly built by the Templars. Oh, thanks, Ross. He's from New England. He's can provide a lot of insights. Patrick Lemire is here, says, a lot of people moved to the Bay Area after the Summer of Love. Amazing, sure. We have some type of demographic reason. And what did I say about the United States compared to other countries? Bigger population, more serial killers. And would you believe that countries like China try to deny that they have serial killers? Absolutely not. I mean, like, that is just so not true. And I've talked about several of them on this channel. It's easier to remember their nicknames. The Monster Killer and the Jewel Thief, Chinese serial killers who operate the same way that serial killers do in the United States of America. If anything, in China, there are more serial killers. They're just not getting caught and not being reported on by the media. Murder in the air hypothesis. And Dark Side of the Moon says, oh, hello to Joey, Patrick, and Planet X Filmworks. Yes, thank you so much, Dark Side. And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, have you heard about Trump who wants to reopen Alcatraz? Oh, yes, I've heard that in the news that Donald Trump wants to reopen the Alcatraz prison. And I don't have too many comments on that. Of course, I immediately think about Frank Morse and John and Clarence Anglin, the three men who escaped from Alcatraz back in 1962, who went on to become suspects in the Zodiac Killer mystery, the D.B. Cooper mystery, and a host of others. I don't think they did it, though. Tyler Scott says, DC snipers, serial killers, or domestic terrorists seem the exact same to me. Tyler, I think that the DC snipers were both. And what I also noticed when I looked into the DC sniper case, and I have 2 episodes about it here on Black Box Online Radio, is that what we saw in the DC area, in the Beltway area, was not everything. Additional murders were committed outside of the Bay Area that were not part of this. So it's not like it's some type of giant spree killing where it's all just one plan and there's no return to normalcy. There's no cooling off period. There were cooling off periods. And it's been a very long time since I've made those episodes, so I'm a little bit hazy on the details. But that was my biggest takeaway, saying, yes, these are serial killers. Did they have a motive that was politically oriented? Well, John Allen Muhammad did. And it appears that Lee Boyd Malvo was manipulated. He was in a vulnerable place. He went along with something that he shouldn't have done. But still, homicidal all the same. And you can't really get a lesser punishment of that. Just saying that some guy was a jerk to you and you had no other family, so you went along with the jerk. Thanks, Snoop. And we have some comments here saying, Miami has too many deaths. Well, now that Dexter's gone, probably not. Oh, and Patrick Lemire says Murder in the Air was called Season of. Oh, well, I might as well be using mine because that's one of the things that I'm going to just try and coin in the future. Like, I even went in an article once that was done about me, and I said that I was the first person to use the term True Crime Talk Radio. And then I found out that another program had been using that name back in 2018. And I'm just like, one victory. That was all that I was asking for. All right, though, but let's get to some more comments, though, that were left about the New England serial killer. And we have some here from, this is another one that really stood out to me. When someone wants to list off a set of oxymorons, and that is that the first one is jumbo shrimp, the second is military intelligence, the third is reality star, and the fourth is internet sleuth, saying that we should criticize the internet sleuths who are trying to talk about the New England serial killer. We should criticize the internet sleuths who are trying to connect the dots. And firstly, those aren't oxymorons except for jumbo shrimp. An oxymoron is when you have 2 words where one is an adjective and its other definition, it has a secondary definition that would be a contradiction. Like jumbo means big, shrimp means small. Jumbo shrimp could mean big, small, except it has a different meaning. It's like pretty ugly. Someone is pretty ugly. That's an oxymoron. Military intelligence, no. And yes, I've heard that joke before. I just don't find it funny. Reality star, again, I don't find that funny. You can be famous and be on a reality show. And this is some poetic justice on behalf of internet sleuths. This person wrote this comment out that internet sleuth is an oxymoron. And just by chance, the next video that I happened to watch on YouTube was the story of an internet sleuth who solved a 40-year-old cold case by connecting the dots and talking about it on Reddit. I'm like, wow. Internet sleuth is not an oxymoron. And some people have also pointed this out. Even if You think that these tip lines are not helpful. You think people in the general public aren't helpful. You think that Mr. So and so can't connect the dots. You think that, oh, this person is never going to solve a true crime case. They're just somebody sitting at home watching TV and watching the internet, and they're just like playing on their phones. Maybe they actually do a little bit of reading about it, but they're not going to solve the case, right? What someone once advised was, if someone believes that they have a lead, they should still come forward with it. Because if they don't, maybe they actually did solve the case. It's better to bring it forward and have the authorities evaluate it. If it's valuable, it's valuable. If it's not, it's not. Easier said than done, but that just means internet sleuthing is good. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect science. Oh, Patrick Lemire says David Orenchak is an internet sleuth. Yes. Yes, and he's also an expert on ciphers, and he helped solve the Zodiac's Z340 cipher. That's a perfect example. That's an even bigger example. And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, have you read Chaos by Tom O'Neill? Not all of it, but as I understand, Ross Geraci of Planet X Filmworks had the opportunity to interview him. I've heard so many interviews with Tom O'Neill. I absolutely love the stuff, but I have not read the entire book. So, we have some other things here. Somebody says all you have to do to convince Americans that there's a conspiracy theory is to tell them that it isn't a conspiracy. Why is everybody hating on the United States of America all of a sudden? It appears that a lot of people who are watching these true crime videos are just criticizing other people for watching true crime videos and saying, well, you know what? You're dumb because you're an American. You watch true crime videos and you try to think about it for yourself. Well, what exactly are you doing other than being from another country? Yeesh. Someone says social media is stupid. No, Yes, okay. Double-edged sword. Social media is very good for sharing these ideas. You can raise awareness on social media. You can have campaigns on social media. But people can also put stuff out that's very unfiltered and unregulated. The next one is from Tick Toffee, who says, oh, Tick Toffee. You made me laugh. It seems like a huge reach to call this a work of a single serial killer. It reminds me of the smiley face killers theory, but with even less evidence to link the deaths. I hope justice and more answers will be found for the deceased in each of the cases. You know, I would actually disagree with that. I would say that the New England serial killer case has more evidence than the smiley face killers theory, because the smiley face killers theory is nationwide. And that is that around bodies of water, men, mostly white males around college age or in their 20s, are found dead from drowning. Could they be murdered by a serial killer gang who's leaving graffiti of smiley faces as a signature? Or are these just people who are intoxicated near bodies of water who are drowning because they are unaware of their actions, and the smiley face is just a very common form of graffiti? I tend to think that it's the latter, but that's a nationwide serial killer theory, not one that's concentrated in New England. I'd say there's more evidence. And I even posted a photo on Instagram once of just finding a smiley face graffito by the Riverside once. Very, very common form of graffiti. Next point. There's also a serial killer legend, as I call it, in the state of Texas. Some people just simply call it the Austin serial killer, but another nickname is the Rainy Street Ripper. Almost identical to the smiley face killers theory, where there's this concentration of deaths that have been happening. Is it a serial killer? Are they accidental? Are they unconnected homicides? In that case, I think most of them are just unconnected deaths that are the results of tragedies. Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says social media could be toxic. Oh, it can be. It can be, but can also be very helpful for sharing communication. But great to share. Hey, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, you beat me to it. Joey Shrake says, since I'm late to the party, did anyone bring up the name Wilhite as an unofficial POI concerning the New England serial killer? Is that am I pronouncing that right, Joey? No, I did not bring up that name. I haven't discussed that person yet. I brought up a different person of interest, but I would love to know what you think about that person. Please put it in the comment section down below. Now, somebody here, Virtually D, says, it takes the police a long time to use the word serial killer. I understand the reason, though. Often, it's just not that. Well, As I said, though, there could be 150 active serial killers in the United States at any given time, which is a very small portion of the population. But somebody brought this up. I think it was even one of you guys in the comment section that worded it this way. And that was that the most dangerous serial killers out there, why not BS the public and reduce the pressure on the force? Because they don't believe it? Because as I understand with skepticism, it's more like, everybody, this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning is winding down, but please let me know if you can still hear and see everything. And I thought that this one was getting off without a hitch as opposed to the last True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. But I have one final question for you, and I hope you guys can hear me for this one. Please put something in the chat if you can. And this one is, could the New England serial killer possibly be the fabled Zodiac? No, sorry. If the Zodiac killer were alive, he would probably be between 72 and 85 years old. I don't think he's dumping anybody's body in New England. But we have it in writing from anonymous person on the internet number 1. A connection between the New England serial killer and the Zodiac. And some of you guys asked me, is there really a connection among all serial killers and the Zodiac killer? Mostly. The earliest one is Jack the Ripper that I found. The newest is the New England serial killer. Patrick says, no, the New England serial killer is D.B. Cooper or Jack the Ripper. Well, people are living longer these days, Patrick. Okay, now, Joey's suspect is named Dennis Willite. And Patrick Lemire says, the white serial killer default has allowed black serial killers to rack up huge body counts. Oh my goodness, I'm not even going to dispute that with you, Patrick. When you look at people like Samuel Little murdering over 90 people, when you look at other people like Carl Eugene Watts, the Sunday morning slasher, who may have murdered over 100 people, I mean, there's this trope out there that serial killers are just white males. Yet there are so many African-American serial killers who have racked up high body counts. And I'm not going to blame anybody. I'm not going to throw around the blame game, but I'm just going to point out that that is something that definitely happens. There are prolific serial killers who are African-American. They're prolific serial killers who are Latino, especially in Latin America. When you look at the crimes of Pedro Alonso Lopez, when you look at the crimes of Luis Garavito, who murdered hundreds of people. And then people are like, all serial killers are white males. Are you sure? And this episode is winding down, and I'm Joey Shrake. I'm going to look into Dennis Willite maybe for a future episode. And if anybody has any final things for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, you can put them in the comments section or the live chat. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and please feel free to tune in tomorrow for an episode about Jack the Ripper. Every Wednesday I talk about Jack the Ripper, every Friday about D.B. Cooper, and every Monday about the Zodiac Killer. Black Box Online Radio comes to you Monday through Friday. And with those episodes, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning is live 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on YouTube. And you can get all of these shows available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, anywhere you get your podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. That'll be all for me now, and I'll see you on Ripper Wednesday. Until next time.